Yelena Semyonova with her big dumb face.
The longest opening sequence.
It's when are all chairs bolted to the...
We're not told that.
Yeah, we do.
We're not told that.
It is written. It is written.
Well, obviously it's fall.
I came here for the Halloween party. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah. Do you just keep weird sex masks in your basement?
Yeah.
Can I come?
You
over?
not do that? You don't do that?
Well, yeah, that's what this one is. I should have put Film Hacker on. It is fall, everybody. It is a nice. I had a pumpkin beer today, and I sipped it, and I was like, it's fall. Great, cool.
I had a lot of pumpkin beer this weekend.
Nice. So now we're in.
A lot of beer.
We've had a lot of horror movies this year so far. And now we're in the horror movie season. I can't wait for next month, and then that's all I do. Like, that's all my time is spent watching horror movies.
Horror films.
So it's nice to have something of a horror film this week with Kenneth Branagh.
It's not really a horror movie.
Haunting in Venice. It's got horror elements. It's
not a horror movie.
He referred to it as a supernatural thriller. It's like, okay, you mean a horror movie? So they're not the same thing, but they're close.
It's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something we can talk about.
Yeah, we will talk about it. But in the meantime, I'm going to remove you. Let's just get right to it, McCurds. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. A Haunting in Venice once again puts Hercule Poirot to the task of figuring out who done it, but this time with an interesting supernatural element that somewhat turns this story into a horror film. The movie does a good job of presenting questionable events involving spirits and ghosts to the point that their realness is arguable either way based on one's personal interpretation, while also thematically plugging directly into Hercule's personal story of having lost his faith in God because of the horrible things he's seen over the course of his career. However, in the end, it's a very subtle movie, as really nobody is heavily suspected by the audience or otherwise up until Hercule figures everything out after a single conversation per suspect and exposes the killer in one fell swoop and then immediately regains his faith because he believes he saw a ghost. So just like the aforementioned faith theme, there are two interpretations of this subtle quality to the film. One, that it is simply and classically told, and the other, that it is tired and lazy. I lack a strong emotional connection to this movie, so it wouldn't take the world's greatest detective to figure out where I stand. Which, it's not a bad movie by any means. It's just like slightly underwhelming.
I had the very similar feeling, and I know this movie has gotten some decent praise because I do think like
it's decent.
It's like
it should get decent praise.
It's not a bad movie. It is not a bad movie. I think it's a good movie, but
it's firmly in the good category. Again, masterful.
It's definitely good. It's
masterful, great, really good piece of shit. And this is good. I don't even know if it's really good. It's good. It's certainly not great.
It's okay. I think what it is that like it reminds me of when I saw the Planet of the Apes films. Every time I've seen those, every single one that I remember watching, people would say, "Oh man, these are the best movies. You got to see these." Or like critics would say, "Oh, they're classy. They're really well done." And I'd go see the movie, and I'm like, I couldn't find any flaws in it. But there wasn't anything there that made me go.
The new ones.
Go like, oh yeah, the newer ones, not the Tim Burton one.
Well, not
but the newer
classic ones.
You're
talking about the classic ones?
No, not the classic ones. Just the ones that like the ones Matt Reeves. Well, I think Matt Reeves only did the second two, but the guy who directed Batman, the Batman or whatever. It was the same feeling. I left the theater and be like, it was good. Like I didn't have, but I was like, I don't know where the flaws were. There wasn't anything that like stuck out to me that was like, oh man, like this is terrible.
But it doesn't, it doesn't hit in a way that you're oh my God,
but I also think it's because
we did
it's
it,
a murder
everybody.
Mystery. And I think another part of it is just it's just I don't want to say it's like overdone and cliche, but it's like it kind of like I don't know if that's the best way of saying it. It's just been done to death. Like this form of story has been done to death. But it's also it's kind of that Marvel problem or the superhero problem I talked about. Like we were talking about Blue Beetle. It's where with Blue Beetle, with DC, it was like you got to get your stories to the screen first because that's what's going to hit the zeitgeist, regardless of if you wrote it first in another form or whatever. You told that story in a different version.
Yeah.
And I feel the same way with this, where it's like, and it's sort of like saying that because like I think if you didn't know who this, which I'll talk to you about in a minute, it's like if you didn't know where this style of story came from and you had just saw Clue, you'd be like, oh, they copied Clue, and I'm like, no, this is just a very old story, just retold modern day audiences.
Rewind the tape 5 minutes, just like I said. Is it? And as I walked out, I was like, is this just like a really simple, classically told story, or is Kenneth maybe just kind of aging? And that's kind of where my main idea is like, Kenneth ain't bad, and he's probably the best part of the movie. He may be who we toast to, but
it's not a bad movie.
It's not a bad movie,
but it's worth seeing. But I don't think a lot of people...
Is there anything fresh about it other than the fun seance stuff?
There is. But then, I think there is at least an element they add into this because I knew I had a suspicion going into this one that the marketing was going to be very misleading because you were going to think, oh, this is going to be a horror movie. And what you actually get is like a horror movie, wink, wink, but it's more of like, because
that's the whole question of the movie.
Saying it was like,
is it real or not?
Supernatural thriller.
Yeah.
And it's like, it is, because it is essentially like it's any of his detective stories. It's just got that. It's kind of like it's kind of like if this was a TV series, this was the Halloween episode. You know what I mean? Like that's the vibe I get from this one. So let's go ahead and get into it. Hold on, I think I have to add. There we go.
Controls again.
Let's go ahead and get into it. Let's go talk about this movie and just some of the things that you may have questions about in regards, or anybody who has never seen any of these movies, because I haven't seen the previous two. So I actually learned a lot doing the research about this and Agatha Christie. But first off, no heroin.
No heroin.
No heroin. And we need to get the chair shirts. I need to get one. I think you know what else we need?
Stupid.
They're so stupid. We
can't wait to get
need,
mine.
I want a Halloween costume. I want a ranked Halloween costume. That's what I want.
Huevos will do it. I
want a mask. I want a Chucky Rance mask. For Halloween,
like this. Yeah.
Yes.
I hate this movie. Yeah.
But like one of these, you know, like sunken in and all that. Like I just want one of that. Also, I need.
No, if it was that, my face would be like this. It'd be like, it just looked like a sex doll.
But you always look like.
Is that what you want? Is that what you want, McCurney?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. But get your merch. And enjoy it. And also, I want Huevos to model off some merch too. So please, Huevos, if you're out there, which you are, you should do that.
He sent everybody a video of him with his new rank shirt, and I was like, "Damn, where's the rap video in your rank shirt?" But anyway, A Haunting in Venice.
A Haunting in Venice. Venice. It is directed by Kenneth Branagh, screenplay by Michael Green, and based on Halloween Party by Agatha Christie. So let's talk about Agatha Christie, because there's a lot to unpack here. Much like Ian Fleming, she was an author. Born in 1890, died 1976. This author has been known as the Queen of Crime. She has written an impressive 66 novels and 14 short stories. Some of those include And Then There Were None, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd. She also wrote the world's longest running play that runs, I believe, in London. It's The Mousetrap, which was first performed in 1952. Many of her novels included the character of Horror, I don't even think I'm pronouncing that right, but that's okay. That's my thing. Who is a Belgian private detective, not French. I think if some people going into this might think he's French. He's Belgian. Who had been adapted. He has been adapted and played by many actors over the years in various mediums, films, television, radio, etc. The character was created in 1920. His age has been called into question because Christie said he was in his 50s or 60s when the character was created. But every subsequent appearance, he's in all the novels because she wrote until 1975. They just kept the same time period. So she was upset with herself. She's like, I shouldn't have given him an age because he's supposed to be like 50 or 60 in the very first novel, which was 1920. But he's been in every other novel, and every other novel takes place in modern day. So you can only imagine he's like 100 years old probably by the time they get to this book, which is kind of ridiculous. And so, take that, James Bond, who knows how old James Bond is. Fun fact about Christie, she went missing for a considerable amount of time in 1926 after her husband left her. She went missing for, I think, it's like 10 days. And her car was basically found in like a lake or a pond. And so people thought she actually had died. Wow. Then she just showed up in her hotel room. She just showed up and people were like, what happened? Where were you? And she's never explained it. She never explained it in any of her autobiographies or anything. She just never told anybody. So some people think it was amnesia. It was really weird. It was just it was this huge media sensation and nobody knows what actually happened. Some people think it was amnesia. I will tell you, Charlie, I think the truth is out there. I think it was the aliens. I think they abducted Agatha Christie back in 1926, and that's why she went missing. I think that's what happened, honestly.
Did she write all these stories before, after, right in the middle?
This is in the middle. I mean, which one was I mentioning first? The first book that Herc Poirot appears in is The Mystery Affair at Styles. That was 1920. So she was already she was like a J.K. I'm thinking, I don't know why I think J.K. Rowling, but she was like this big mystery writer back then, but she was very old by the time she passed away, but she was still writing all these novels. So people obviously had a fondness for Agatha Christie. Project Bluebeam. That's right.
Oh, here, I got it.
That's right, Huevos.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, he's up on his conspiracy theories.
Moving on. So let's talk about the book real quick, because I did find it fascinating that this movie is not like the book. There's a lot of things that are similar. There's a lot of things that are not.
I really want to know what's different, because I wouldn't.
It's a very different.
Don't like this. Is the second week in a row I'm coming in. I am not going to come in and say this was boring, but I'm like, this seems like not the most effort was put into this versus something like I saw Murder on the Orient Express. That's that's like a classic, and like you said, it's been that how many movies have been made?
There's been
a handful.
One
there's
famous
a handful
one prior to that one.
And what's famous about it is that you have, it's a classic murder mystery where you take and all three of these so far are who are the big stars of the day, and just cast all of them, big ensemble cast. And so it's a lot of fun in that regard. But this one just kind of I was tempted to read a synopsis of the book, because I'm like, what am I missing here? Because it's it's so damn subtle,
It's the book is similar and very different at the same time. So I'll just read very briefly, because I only read through the cliff notes of the books to kind of get a
good,
and cross checked. Oh, this character was this character. Because a lot of times you see these movies and I'm not registering the names of the characters right off the bat. I'm like, I don't know who this character is. He's just a character.
Even in the if you watch the trailer,
that person, the doctor guy.
The trailer of Orient Express. No, it's no names. It's just like the butler, the doctor, the communist, the blah 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 blah.
Yeah, and then you just try to figure out. But I like me. I like mystery stories. So I was up for this, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so the book doesn't. First off, book's title was Halloween Party with the little asterisk in there. So Halloween Party. And the book does not take place in Venice.
That's an apostrophe.
It takes place a little apostrophe, a little. Yeah. Okay, I'll continue. Sorry. Book does not take place in Venice. It takes place in London. It is, however, at a Halloween party by Rowena Drake at her house. Same character, basically, in the book that was in the movie. Joyce Reynolds is the first to be murdered, like in this movie. However, all that seance stuff, it's not even in the book.
Wow.
So pretty much a good chunk of what kind of was the setup for this movie with the seances and all that stuff, it never takes place in the book. I guess I was trying to read a little bit about Agatha Christie and seances, and it was like I think she was in that, it was that same time period when this was like, they kind of stay true to what was going on in the time period with people doing these seances and trying to get people to like believe in ghosts and spirits, and like people making a quick buck off people and doing that kind of thing. Kind of took place roughly around the same time when she was growing up.
We're all going to get together and have a seance, and
Seance.
And you can imagine people would maybe, just like with this, it's Tina Fey's character in the beginning, Oliver, in the beginning of this is like, it's a really fun party and all this crazy stuff happens, and so that's the thing, you'd put on a show, you'd kind of embellish this seance thing a little bit, and
So Joyce Reynolds, however, in the book is the first to be murdered. However, she is a 13-year-old girl, and she is found drowned in a apple bobbing tub, which is similar to this movie. They definitely kind of stick to that. After telling everyone she thought she had seen a murder, like a prior murder. Leopold Reynolds is the second to be murdered. Now, he has the same name as Leopold was the little creepy kid, but it's a different last name. This Reynolds being the brother of that 13-year-old girl in the book. And in the end, it is revealed to be that Rowena Drake is the murderer. There's also a garden, kind of like in this one, but there's nothing to do with poison or the honey or any of that stuff. Sorry, spoilers. And then it's just a way more convoluted plot because there's a lot more characters. Some of the characters that are in the book are like, there's some that are kind of similar to the ones that are in the movie, but there are a lot that don't show up. Like Olga, who's like the housemaid girl that's in the movie, she's a character, and I think she's actually found dead in the book at one point. The Tina Fey character, Adrienne Oliver, she's a character that brings Poirot into the fray, much like in this movie. However, she's a reoccurring character in all of Agatha Christie's books. So she's a character that, like, much like Poirot, she had put in a lot of our other novels, and she is a crime novelist. So it's quick to see that it's like, oh, it's Agatha Christie putting herself in her own stories. I could kind of see that. But yeah, she's in a bunch of her other books. She doesn't solve murders, but like I guess what I was reading was like that character was used so that she would be a tell for the audience. So as they're reading the book, she would display information that kind of the audience could be like, oh, like they could start thinking clues and seeing how the pieces all fit together. And I've never read any of these books. So, but basically when I was reading the synopsis, it's very convoluted.
Okay. What I'm curious about is that, so again, I say all the time, I'm like, if you're watching, don't watch this if you haven't seen the movie unless you want to know things. That's just always been our rule, rather than being like spoilers. But because it is a murder mystery, I feel obligated to say spoiler supreme, because that's the best part of a murder mystery. So if you don't want to know, go away. But so Tina Fey's character it's pretty obvious right away that she's supposed to be Agatha Christie. Their first scene is he's like, it's one of those screenwriting moments where he's telling her information she already knows, and you're like, okay, I get it. That's meant for the audience. Like he's like, you're a best-selling writer, and she's like, thank you. I already knew that. Why are you telling me that? Like that was an element of that scene. But my question would be is how much of that is in the book? And I don't know if you know that, having just read a synopsis or whatever, but
they're friends. And the way that I read it didn't sound like he went to the party right away in the book. In the book, it sounds like she's at this party. There's a murder that happens and she calls him up to come. Because
they break up at the end of this movie. They break up. They're no longer like they call off their friendship because she took advantage of him. So I'm curious how much of that is in the book, because it's like so because as far as I know, she wasn't in the previous two movies. She definitely wasn't in Orient Express, and I don't think she was in Death on the Nile.
I think based off of I think just based off of what I read of the synopsis of the book, because I didn't go into great detail, nor have I ever read the book. It sounds like they did take a lot of liberties with this, but also they knew that, they're probably just thinking, oh, let's make a trilogy of these movies with Kenneth Branagh, and he was like, I'm just going to do 3, and maybe
That's all they're doing.
finds. I don't know if they're doing more. I have no idea, honestly, but
Okay.
maybe that's my thinking, is that they're like, let's just do 3, and then like let's actually have some kind of cap or something to cap this one off.
But what is the lesson
theatrically or
learned at the end of
sponsored.
this one is that he's back to doing cases, so the
Yeah,
door's
who knows?
open to keep going.
I don't know.
And I'd be
it's-
a-okay with them continuing. Again,
there's
I
a
think
ton
this
of. I
one's
mean, he was in that character's in 33 novels that Agatha Christie did. So the sky's the limit. They could do a ton more stories that they could do. I think ABC Murders was one of them. There's a ton of books that are probably, there's the famous ones. This one's probably like one of the least known ones, maybe, but he's in a bunch of them. And I think this has been, we'll talk more, but yeah, essentially that's really all I got with the books. The book and the story, just they're very, very different. There's an affair. There's a character that's supposed to be someone's father, and you find out that she thought she was widowed, and like there's a lot of weird things in there. And it's like I couldn't go through everything because you would be like, who's this person? Because there's not a correlation to every single character. There's a lot of other characters that they created for the movie. There's characters that are in the book that do exist in the movie, but they're not the same characters. Like, for instance, like Joyce Reynolds in this movie is this world-renowned psychic who came out of who was arrested, and she would they build her up as she came out of jail, and she was like the last person to be found guilty of witchcraft, so that's why she was in jail, and they make her sound real spooky and stuff. And in the book, it's like, oh yeah, she's just a 13-year-old girl who thought she saw a murder, and she's at this party, and you're like, well, that's such a different, that's like a huge contrasting difference. I like the story that they tell in this movie, though. It's not like I don't like that. Let's just move on real quick, though. So like we were talking, there have been 2 other films, Murder on the Orient Express and on the Nile. Haven't seen either of these films. I couldn't tell you if they're good, if they're bad. I think I tried to watch Murder on the Orient Express. I couldn't get through it. I was having trouble. But there's a lot of characters, a lot of people to be like, oh, this person and this person. So
they all have a very similar flavor to them. But there's a reason why Murder on the Orient Express has been told a lot, because it's unique. I'll just say that it is unique.
I think I know how it ends. But
I'm not going to say here.
Back.
But
no,
it's unique.
I want to go back and watch that one. I want to actually go back and watch both of these movies. But
I see you've got Sean Connery down there.
That's not Sean Connery. That's Albert Finney.
No, that's Sean Connery.
Who was supposed to be Sean Connery.
No. Sean Connery's on that poster right there. He's one of the players. He's not Poirot, but he's one of the players.
He is on the. Oh, okay. That's a weird. Okay. Well, actually, let's talk about that real quick. I just put this one on here because this is the most famous, I think, of all of that work. Was this movie? Yeah. Was directed by Sidney Lumet, and he starred Albert Finney, who would only play the character one time. There were some other actors that I think K1 had mentioned, and one of the other actors who's played Poirot 100 times. Like, he's played him a lot in television and in movies. But in this movie particularly, played by Albert Finney. Finney was actually the old guy in Skyfall, which I didn't know. So which is kind of cool. That now that you say Connery was in that movie, you're like, oh, that's kind of a fun little everything's all connected thing. So, but that one's probably the most well-known of all the previous adaptations and versions with this character. Real quick, got the screenwriter. This was written by Michael Green. He had written all the previous 2 films, and it's by himself, which I think is very impressive, because a lot of times you get these Hollywood movies and they're like, there's either a team or there's like 5 writers, or it's a team and then it got passed off to another team and they rewrote it and stuff like that. So he wrote all 3 of these movies by himself, and which is kind of cool. But he did write a couple other films, including Logan, Green Lantern, which was part of with other people, Blade Runner 2049, which I think he wrote with others, and then Disney's Jungle Cruise. Those are just some of the more well-known ones that I saw on his IMDb. But yeah, and more recently too. So it's kind of cool. He's been,
as Huevos just put it, dude's writing his dick off.
I mean, yeah, man.
Or dude's writing his dick off, because Huevos' spelling and grammar is exceptional. I'll just say that.
It's very good. It's very well. It's very well done. And then we got the man of the hour himself.
I'm retarded. Continuing on. Wait, just real quick, just to you, Huevos. Cheers to Huevos. Which, by the way, I'm sitting here with a ton of. Speaking of fall, I'm gonna drink all this Fireball by the end of the night.
I mean, apple cider with that Fireball.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But
so
anyway.
we got Kenneth Branagh stars and directs this film. He did so with the previous two, like we talked about. And he's also known for a lot of his Shakespeare adaptations. He did Henry V. He did Hamlet, which I think is actually a really good adaptation.
Yeah.
I think I first learned about him
that. He made from what I always heard was that he saw the Mel Gibson movie that had just come out for Hamlet. He watched that and he was like, "This is," and I haven't seen it. Just for the record, I haven't seen it, but he was like, "This is bullshit," and so he immediately set out to make his version of Hamlet,
a better version,
which is like,
I think
if
it's
you're showing it in school. That's what they would show.
That's the one I watched.
It is. Definitive.
That's how I learned about. That's actually how I learned about Kenneth Branagh. I had a senior. Actually, she was my. I think I had her sophomore year, and I had her my senior year. It was the same teacher, and I think my senior year was for English class, and she showed us two of his films, one being Hamlet, because we had to do, you remember we had to go over Shakespeare and did Hamlet. So we watched his Hamlet, which I thought was, at the time I was like, this is dumb. But then over time I've grown an appreciation for the Hamlet movie and the story of Hamlet. And also Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which came out roughly a little bit after the same time as Bram Stoker's.
Is that with De Niro?
Stoker's Dracula, which was the Coppola Dracula. It was like around the same time in the 90s. His movie didn't do as well, but I do remember watching that version.
Is that with De Niro?
In class. Yes, that's the one with De Niro. So he plays Frankenstein. De Niro plays the monster in that one. He also directed the first Thor movie. He's directed a bunch of movies such as Belfast. And then more recently, he's collaborated with Christopher Nolan in his last three films, and he's been in Dunkirk, Tenet, and now Oppenheimer, which is our number one on this list for this year. So very talented dude, probably full of himself, which is great because he played that character in Harry Potter as well. So he's been in a lot of stuff. He's in everything.
Apparently his ego is legendary, and it's like, at a certain point, that's how it has to be.
Yeah. He's got I would imagine he's got a huge ego, but he's very talented. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I didn't mention Harry Potter, but he played
like you said in Harry Potter, he was like a hyper version of himself, where but he's a fraud, right? He's
is it Gilbert Godfrey, right? Got someone out there.
Gilbert Godfrey? No,
Gilbert Gottfried.
No, that's this guy. What the? Anyway, moving on.
Gilderoy, I think that's what it is. I think it's Gilderoy.
Yeah.
It's Gilderoy, but he plays
like that,
he plays Gilbert Godfrey actually.
Oh my god. Okay. Anyway.
So I got to this slide and I was like, I hate these big cast movies we do. So I was just like,
you don't have to, dude. It's a huge ensemble. You don't have to do everybody. We know Tina Fey is. We know who Beth from Yellowstone is. We certainly know Michelle Yeoh.
We know very much who Michelle Yeoh is. We already know who all these people are. This is my last slide. I was like, but it's telling that like the top three are all these like gorgeous women. They're like been in all these movies that have been these huge
I only
hits.
have one question. But like a singular question. Since when does Tina Fey have a huge scar on her face?
I didn't notice that.
Look, it's even in that photo right there. I was the whole movie. I'm looking at it going, and I'm like, wait, since when does Tina Fey have a big scar? And
did you look that up?
And I was curious if that was a makeup, but I was like, no, that looks real as hell.
Oh, yeah, it is real.
So since when like what she get in a car accident or something?
Says a stranger slashed face when she was 5 years old.
So she's always had that, and I never
In
noticed it
front
until
yard of her
this
house. Says
movie.
Richard Scar is fascinating to me. This is somebody who's, no matter what it has gone through something. Yeah, like crazy. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Fight Club.
Freemason Fight Club.
Freemason. That's so low level. It's like Freemason, Illuminati, Bilderberg. Like, it's like, Freemason's like way down here. Anyway. Yeah, I never noticed it until watching this movie.
Notice,
and I'm like,
I didn't notice until you said that, because I never noticed it. But yeah, it's also weird. I just think this is a weird. It's like it's weird seeing Tina Fey in anything that's not comedy. It's like what's the other one that I think of from Bridesmaids, who was the lead in that? She's like, it's like you see her in any serious. What was it? Kristen Wiig.
Yeah.
You see her in any serious movie, you're like, this is weird. It's like Sandra Bullock being in a serious movie, because you're like, you have a comedic
I've
edge
never
to
had
you.
that. I've never had that, because anybody who understands comedy can really understand drama.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying she was bad.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not saying she's bad in this movie.
But I might be. I was very much, because I understand what you're saying, I was very much scrutinizing her, and I'm like, she's adequate. But I you still can't. She didn't exactly transcend SNL sketch in this. Like, and that's where that is why it's a challenge.
I don't know what it is.
No, it is a challenge for people to make that jump, and it shouldn't be, because anybody who understands the comedy of a moment can understand the drama, because there's a very fine, blurry line between comedy and drama. You know, what do you do when you laugh a lot? You cry. What do you do when you're sad? You cry. Like, there's similar emotions in human psychology. So if you understand one, it's quite obvious you understand the other. The classic cases being someone like even John Candy had serious roles, right? Like funny fat guy, but then he had serious roles. Jim Carrey's probably
Riley. I think John C.
Riley for sure. Jim Carrey
really
probably did better than anybody else, unless
Robin Williams.
No, you're retract what I just said. Robin Williams is king. You're correct. He is king of understanding both worlds. So so when people say, "Well, I just like I can't get used to it," I'm like, "Shut up." But all the same, Tina Fey hasn't done a lot of serious roles, and
this is the first serious role I've seen her in. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and there were times where I'm like,
serious role. She's fine. Like, she doesn't
fine.
She doesn't ruin the movie for me. But it is one of those things where every time she pops on screen, you're like, are we in an SNL sketch?
She's playing a role.
And it's because
you can tell she's playing
on
a role.
SNL.
Yeah, it didn't come across as
done so much SNL.
And I love Tina Fey, but she didn't come across as completely authentic. She came across as more kind of jokey and not even when, again, spoilers, even when he confronts her, where he's like, "You've been using me this whole time. I'm here based on some BS." Because her whole thing is, and the moment she said, the moment she said, "I only eat apples," I was like, I'm highly suspicious of this individual. That is weird. But she said, "You know me, I only eat apples until supper." So I was like, that's a thing. Take note of that. I wrote that in my little notepad. I was just like,
we should have notes. If you go to this movie, write down notes.
Yeah, exactly. Just like him. Like, look, like, what's he doing? He's writing notes.
Just write notes down as you go to this movie. That'll be more fun.
Yeah. But she's like, "I need you to come to this party. And I'm also a failing. I used to be a really awesome author, and now I'm failing. I'm fading." And I was like, boom. Also very suspect. There's like motive. Right away. It's like she's going to be involved somehow. But all the same, she was fun at times. But overall, she didn't exist. There were shine. I wanted Tina Fey to shine, but maybe she was miscast for this. Unfortunately,
I don't know. It wasn't the worst, honestly.
No, it's not bad. It's just fine.
There wasn't anybody there. Literally, for me, there was nobody in this cast that I was like, they're the weakest link in the whole thing. And maybe it was Tina Fey, but I didn't really think she was that bad. I thought everyone was great. Yeah. They were good.
It's like the movie itself.
It's
not bad, but it's fine.
It's fine. It's a
but
good
you know
movie.
Me, you know my track record. I'm like, so what is that?
Well, I told you when we did this one, I was like, well, here comes another one you're just gonna hate. And you're like, I will.
I don't hate it. I
You're
don't
like,
hate it.
I will tell you if I hate this or not. So let's put up
Yeah.
that list. Let's put up
Oh.
that list. Let's talk
Where
about
that
the list.
list at,
'Cause then we
yo?
can start arguing in this movie. Because
Do you have an initial?
I would put it closer to the world of Creed and Sound of Freedom for me personally. That's where I'm like, I would put it there only
You and I, you
because
did. No, you and I are right there. My gut reaction was just below Sound of Freedom, because Sound of Freedom actually hits. Like, you walk out of Sound of Freedom like
you
haunted,
walk out of
which
Sound with
doesn't
some
automatically mean better. But I
no.
walked out of this like, okay,
I think the
you know,
classiness of this movie definitely shoots it up there because again, like when you go to this movie, you come out of it and you're like, I can't think of a single bad thing about this movie because everything was great and like every little nitpick, I didn't have any
Yeah.
nitpicks. Like I really didn't. I was like, I have nothing to nitpick about this movie. Nothing bothered me. Everything played it very safe. Everything was like made sense. It does get I think the only thing you can complain about is like it gets super convoluted at times, but you have to remember that that's the kind of story you're seeing is there's a lot of
yeah,
these but it's
no
been
doubt.
it's like it's going back to that Blue Beetle thing I was talking about with DC and Marvel and getting your stuff to the screen first. With these types of stories, they've been parodied prior to this movie with movies like Murder by Death or Clue, which basically take that same basically they take Agatha Christie's version of a story where there's a group of people, they're at an event or a party or on a ship or on a boat or in a train, and a murder happens. And then Perot's there and he has to solve the murder and he goes and he makes his list and he figures out everybody's motives and why everyone was there and tries to figure all this stuff out. And then finally we get the classic scene, which is almost a cliche at this point because it is a cliche, where everybody or it's a trope. It's a trope. Let me walk that back. It's a trope where everybody sits around and he basically spills the beans and says, "This is what happened. This is what." Like the same with Clue. Clue did the exact same thing. They had what was it in Walsworth or the
It
butler
was
is the one
so
who
and
goes
so
through and
with the wrench in the study.
same thing, same
Yeah.
exact thing. Except I think what's different about this one is like we actually get two moments where there's reveals like this, but none of them are fake. Like
But there's one
I
main
kind of
one.
was I
There's
was thinking
a little one, right? Are you talking about
there's
when
the
he
little one
confronts
where you
Tina
find out
Fey?
about Tina Fey and the police officer
Yeah,
that he's hired,
which
and
was
you're
kind of
like,
weird.
"Oh,"
That raises questions,
it raises
right?
questions, and so it's not like he doesn't reveal them to be the murderers, but he reveals their ulterior motives for him being at the party because at this point in the story, which isn't in the book, is that he doesn't want to be a detective anymore. He's like, "I'm done doing that. I've done that 100
Even
times.
though he's still
I'm
really
kind
good
of
at
saying
it.
to myself."
Yeah.
He's very good at it. And
But
then
like I laid out in the beginning, he's like, I've seen enough. Right away they paint a picture of we're in 1947, so World War II just ended, the
right.
worst war in history just ended, and so the world has just went through a horrible episode. And meanwhile, everywhere he goes, and they say that several times, is like everywhere you go, there's death and despair, and it's like, well, is that the case, or doesn't he just? Is it that wherever he goes, people die, or is it that people die and then he goes and
And he goes there. I don't
detects and
know.
investigates? But regardless, that's kind of the theme, is that he's like, I just want peace, and I did appreciate in the opener, he's just in Venice, and they make a point of showing this beautiful city, and he every time he's like Jesus Christ or Neo, where every time he walks out of his door, there's all these people that are like, hey, 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 and they all want something from him.
Yep.
Can you? Something happened in my family, and I need you to investigate. And he's just like, get out of here. Like he wants nothing to do with mysteries anymore. And then Tina Fey comes in, and she's like, you gotta, like, this seance is so crazy, and you gotta come to this party, and we'll and if you can figure it out, like if it were to stump you, it'd be the most incredible thing. And that's kind of one of my main questions, is it's like, yeah, but so all of your books are fiction, right? But they never really clarified whether or not her books are specifically all of
I
Hercule's
think
tales. And so, do you understand what I'm getting at? Where
I get where you're
it was
coming
like
at, but I think
it was like,
there's a
why do
part
you
there's like
need
a
this to
meta thing
happen?
there. there's a
little
meta thing
bit.
in there. I think there's a little bit of a meta thing where it's like the movie's kind of winking at you, and if you know, you know. If you don't know, that you don't know. But
I
like
don't know, and I want to
the
know.
movie's like, oh, she's Agatha Christie, and the joke is that like Agatha Christie's been writing all these novels about Poirot, and like that's what made her famous. But then like that's kind of where they're tying it in with the movie is like that's not exactly how it all transpired, but like that's kind of what they're
But
doing. Is they're
why
like
is
saying,
it? The question it raises is this: why is it that because she says she's like I had 27 bestsellers back to back, and my last 3 have all been stinkers according to the critics. So so right away, as soon as she said that, I was like, she did it, or she's guilty of something. And
yeah,
so later when he confronts her,
she
it's
is
like
guilty of
you put this whole thing on uh uh basically, like, remember speaking of 2023 movies, remember Scream 5, where the predates Scream 6, 2023,
Yeah.
where the whole thing was we're going to commit a new series of murders so that the next Scream, the next Stab movie, right, the meta movies within the Scream universe, the next Stab movie will be really good because it'll be based on our murders. And that was kind of my thought right away. I was like, oh, is Tina Fey going to kind of, Miss Oliver's going to orchestrate this whole thing so that she has more material to write with. But it's like, at the same time, isn't that what imagination is for? Why do you need this to happen in order, like, is she going to put on the book like the mystery that even stumped
Well, yeah, but you and I have always talked about
world famous
you and I have always talked about like
detective.
why do theaters like why would you put your movie in theaters? Why don't you just put it straight to streaming? And it's like, well, the part of that is like you want to get butts in the seats, you want to get people there, so you make a big deal about it.
Based on
Much
a
in the
true
same way as you're like
story.
ripped from the headlines, which has
Yeah,
very much
yeah,
been used over and over again with Law and Order and other medias, where it's
yeah.
like, yeah, you're going to say, hey, this was a real life story. I have the book about what happened. Like I think that's where that lies. But I didn't really look too hard into that. But I guess I see why you're like tripped up by it. You're like, wait, what? The other
Like, how
thing
did that
I like
connect with the whole thing? Because remember, he confronts her, and she's like, "Okay, so sue me, bitch."
but
And the whole
she
and
yeah.
it's like, okay,
But
because the
then by
whole
that
thing was
point
that
he's
she and the
like,
police officer, his bodyguard, a
right,
retired police officer, conspired together to make the seance be as convincing as possible, so as to stump Hercule, so that she could base her new book off of it and make a comeback. And like, if I look
sure.
the other way, I'm like, fine. But that is going on at the same time that an actual series of murders are going on. So like, was that meant to make Tina
That
Fey look
happened that
guilty
happens
of the
prior to
murder?
them knowing. Yeah, but that's like them. My assumption is like that's happening, that whole thing that you just described is happening prior to them even knowing that there was an actual murder, and B, murder being the one that it's like the murder that happened prior to the story
But
starting, that he has
the
to
fact
uncover,
that there are
and
real murders going
B being
on,
that Reynolds actually gets killed. So he's like,
yeah.
I think it's more, here's what it is. I think it's like he comes into the room and his character's like, he can tell the truth. He just knows everything that's gone. Like he figures everything out. Like he's the guy that would walk into the room and be like, those two people, they're sleeping together, and no one else in the room would figure it out. But for whatever reason, would
It's
know.
because
Like he would
you have semen stain on your face, and
stop,
you have used condoms
stop,
in your pocket. Like, he would just know.
stop. He would know.
Yeah.
He would know. But I think that's the thing. It's like he would know all these facts, and
Yeah.
I think that's why he reveals that information, because he's like he's sorting out. He's like, you did something wrong, but it's not the murder, it's this. And it's kind of like, I don't know. I think it's kind of to put her in her place a little bit. But like that was the vibe that I got from it. So I didn't. The one thing. Okay, the one thing. It's not a nitpick. It's just the one thing I thought maybe the story would do, and I think it's just because I've seen so many parodies of this, including another one that we didn't even mention was Knives Out / Glass Onion, which takes a lot of liberties from the Agatha Christie novel, where you're like, this character that Daniel Craig plays is a modern version of Poirot, almost to a
There
T.
you go. Is it better? Is it better?
I like them both. I don't know. They're
I
both fine.
I
They're
I
like they're same similar stories.
I didn't see Glass Onion, but I thought Knives Out was kind of garbage.
You thought it was
My
garbage?
take was garbage because it was
really
because okay, so in the wake of Star Wars Episode 8, right, where
yeah, because he did that one, and a lot of people didn't like.
Yeah, remember his whole thing was like, I'm going to subvert expectations, and then that led to all these debates about whether or not subverting
Knives Out
expectations
does that,
is
but
good.
like
Knives Out was all about subverting expectations, but not in a classic murder mystery way. It was right away, you know who done it, and then the rest of the movie was about immigration, and it was just like, this sucks. This sucks. You know, Daniel Craig is like having fun. Daniel Craig's having fun. But
to me, it was like that.
There was no murder mystery because they told you who did it after
they told you
who
did it. No, you don't know who did it. You don't know who actually did it until the end of the movie. So I don't know where you're getting that. It's like, yeah, they show what happens where she has to murder him, but then you find out why and actually what had happened. So
yeah, and then the whole thing ends up just being about immigration. And I was like, fuck this movie. This movie sucks. And so I had no interest in seeing Glass Onion because I'm like, if it's anything like its
but regardless of that, I will say that both those movies take heavy inspiration from this style of story.
Yes.
Like, I'm not even saying any
whole bunch of people,
one.
Big ensemble of, you got the guy who
and then they're all
finishing up
playing
James Bond, and every major actor, including the latest Bond girl and all that, all in this big ensemble cast of a whodunit. I love that too. I love that. Like, that is my jam. But then overall with this movie, it's the same thing, but in the end, it's just like, remember when Creed 3 ended? And Creed 3 is like however many Rocky and Creed movies there have been. And remember something I said back then was like that final punch, and then our bad guy fell, and it was like, it's over, and I was like, no, it's not. Wait, what? Wait, it's over? Like the fight ended before it should have, to where I was like, oh, this movie's kind of underwhelming.
I do feel I think
right?
I think I get that. There's a
like
point
he's like, hey guys, I figured it out, and then you're like, you talked to everybody one time and you figured it out. I thought you were in retirement and you somehow atrophied a little bit, but no, it turns out that you're just as good as you've ever been. And
the one thing that I was thinking would happen that didn't happen, and I think, again, like I was getting to this, but that in a lot of these movies, what will happen is you'll get to a point in the story where he reveals like who he thinks the murderer is, but it's not a red herring, but it's like a theory, but like they disprove that theory very quickly, and they're like, actually, that's not what happened, or whatever. Like, I thought we got like that was the Tina Fey thing, but I thought we'd get more where it was like, like they actually did this, or like you actually see Tina Fey with pushing the thing, and then it's just like, I never did that,
But instead, we forget about it right away because we saw another ghost.
We find Tina Fey and we find what happens, and then he like goes down that road, and then he finds out that's not the case.
Her being a suspect was hardly used, even after she admitted to misdirecting him.
By that point, I think the story's like, well, what else are we going to do with her other than she has to stay in the room? She has to be an ally for him.
Do you remember what happened right after that? Right after that, you hear screaming, and they run into the piano room or whatever. And what's his name had been stabbed in the back, and he looks at her, and she goes, "I was standing right in front of you." She's even looking at him like, "There's no way." Which would have been an even better red herring if it had turned out that it was her and the cop and maybe another accomplice or whatever. But that all just kind of took a back seat to the rest of the story.
Well, that's what happened. I mean, that's what the story, like, at the end of the day, here's the things I liked about this. But a couple things I really did like about this movie is, one, I liked how they introduced the idea of supernatural stuff, but like, you see it in the movie, in the trailers and stuff, and you're like, oh, it's a haunted house. But then very quickly you realize that, like, it's not. It's just he's been drugged, and so he keeps seeing these hallucinations. However, there's one hallucination that he sees that leaves you in the movie where it's like, did he actually see a ghost? Because he might have actually seen a ghost at that one point in the story. But most of the movie, it's like, oh, he's like, I've been seeing things I've been hearing stuff, and I've been seeing stuff, and that honey is not actually honey. And then because by the time we got to the kitchen and the guy's like, that doesn't taste like wildflower honey, I was like, it's the honey. There's something about the honey. Someone got poisoned. Something happened with that.
For me, for the kitchen scene was where the ex-boyfriend. Okay, so you have the woman of the house, right? She's this opera singer. She and what's her name again? Like Rowenda,
Rowena Drake.
Yeah, she's the one who lost her daughter. The reason why they're having the seance is because she wants to contact her dead daughter who died of a supposed suicide. As the legend goes, there's this curse on the house where there were a bunch of children who lived there in like a children's hospital manor, and they were all,
and it was like a sanitarium.
And they were all locked into a room to just die of, like, let's say the Black Plague, like just some kind of horrible disease. And so if you go into this house and you are a doctor or a nurse, these ghosts of children will seek revenge on you and kill you. And that's what happens throughout the night, is that a nurse dies and a doctor dies, and they have this mark on their back where it looks like a hand scratch, and it's like, oh my God, the curse of these children. So the kitchen scene specifically is where the boyfriend, the fiance of the dead girl, is being interviewed, because the whole thing is that, like, this murder happens. This woman who conducts a seance, Michelle Yeoh, or Bond girl, she's killed. So Hercule locks the whole building down, tells the ex-cop, his bodyguard, nobody in or out. And so he interviews everybody one by one. And so he's interviewing the ex-fiance. And for you, it was the honey. And yeah, they're highlighting honey throughout the story. I wasn't really like paying that much attention to it, because you never really think about honey being, a drug or whatever.
I wasn't. It was just like, there's something about this. When he said that tastes weird, and then she had said something about the garden early on, I was like, there's something about this honey. I didn't know what it was, but there's something about that.
But for me, the honey, I was just like waiting to hear what that was going to be about. Later, we find out that it's a psychotropic drug. But for me, the moment was when that ex-fiance said, I didn't leave because I didn't leave my fiance because somebody else had more money. I left because when you marry a woman, oftentimes you also marry her mother, which is very true. And he said her mother could never have learned to live without her. And I was like, boom, done. That's where, for me, I was like, it was the mom. Yep. But at the same time, I was like, that's probably too easy. And maybe that's another red herring, or that's another misdirect. But I was like, no, like that makes sense to me. And then when like a couple scenes later, he's like, everybody assemble. The mom did it. And he starts laying out how she did it. I was like, okay, now I still think it was her, but like, is this too easy? And that's what I mean, where in the end, it does kind of just seem a little too easy, where the moment that he's confronting her. So on the one hand, he's supposed to be this incredible detective who would figure it out that quickly. On the other hand, though, he's supposed to be retired, and that maybe he would have atrophied a little bit, and maybe he would falsely accuse her, and that he would actually be wrong. And all the supposed evidence, all the signposts would point to her, but then it would end up being somebody else. So I'm like, wait a second, because I'm usually terrible at murder mysteries. I'm the type where I understand how
any of those shows. You watch any of the shows, and you're like, wait, how did this happen, and who's this, and like,
yeah. If you've seen one of them, one of these, you've seen them all, and usually it's like, you can guess whoever you want, and typically, if you have a brain, you're gonna guess the least, the most ridiculous person. So like, who is the most ridiculous suspect in the death of a daughter? Well, it's gonna be mom. That's crazy. Why would a mom do that? So right away, you're like, okay, it's either her or Tina Fey. Right? It's either gonna be his best friend, or it's gonna be the mom.
I do appreciate that it's not like as. It's not as on the nose when they reveal how it was done, because it's convoluted,
and it was an accident.
It's like the whole thing. It's like it was an accident, but then she like overdose. Then she made it into a whole thing, and so Yeah, it was like the honey
that's
was
good,
supposed to be. She had been feeding her the honey because she didn't want her to leave, so she wanted to make her sick, but she didn't want her too sick. And then her maid Olga gave her too much honey because she was having like all these issues.
She's like, it's just
she
honey.
Didn't realize it was poison.
She
didn't realize it was poison. So technically, the maid did it, but she didn't know she did it. And then the mom made it look like a suicide because she felt guilty. So it's like,
my point being is that I'm used to being so terrible at murder mysteries and because if you're writing a murder mystery, you're gonna use all the same old tricks. You're gonna point at somebody, but then it's like let me throw out an example of how this could have turned out. The doctor, right? So the doctor who is the doctor of the little girl who died, he has a young son, a precocious child. You've been on record, McCurdy, saying people don't like precocious kids. Yeah, because they're creepy as fuck. So this creepy kid is there the whole time. And it would have been, they could have easily done all these like red herrings, and then it was the kid. And why was it the kid? Because I don't know, whatever. But my point being that, as you know, any writer could have written it so that anybody could have been the bad guy. So a lot of times you're watching a murder mystery and you're just waiting for the ending because you're like, it could be anybody, as opposed to this movie actually does lay out clues where if you're paying attention, it's like, it is the honey and who planted the flowers from where the honey would have come from and all that. But I'm usually just sitting there waiting for the answer because it's like, it could be anybody, because any writer is going to try to misdirect you and they're going to be all over the place. So
there's going to be some piece of evidence at the very last second that's going to pop up. That's really going to be the thing that.
But even then, the other, like they walk in and they confront that person, but then like so and so comes out from behind with a gun. It was me.
Okay, there's two things we haven't really talked about. One being there are other players, for instance, Madame Yeoh. Michelle Yeoh has two assistants who have a whole story on their own that leads them to being like, what would their motive be? Which, like, when you think about it, it's like they could have had a motive there too. And then we talked about the boyfriend. He had there's a potential motive there. We had the mom, which we find out is the killer. There's the doctor with the son. There's definitely all these players. Some people that it's very obvious that they probably weren't the murderer, and then some that were like they had more motive than others. But this movie is only like an hour and 43 minutes, which is close to 90-minute movie, and that's probably why I felt the same way. I was like, I left the theater, I'm like, that was shorter than I expected to be. I thought there was going to be another half hour to this, and it was a very short. It was very cut short compared to the other ones, and I felt like this movie,
a lot of that was in the editing.
Movies,
did you pick up on a lot of, especially in the beginning, there was a lot of editing, a lot of just cutting things short. It was my sense right away was like, okay, wait, did they have like a full 2-hour cut of this, and then they told the editor go back in and cut out 15 minutes?
They could have, and I think part of that could have been because
cut a shot to 5 seconds instead of 30.
It's like, we want it to be 100 minutes. We don't want it to be a 2-hour movie. And it could have been because the last two, I don't know if the last two were very successful. It's like, I don't know how successful the last two films were. And this one was like the most low key of the other two, because the other two had like much bigger stars. I mean, I think Michelle Yeoh at this moment in time was the biggest star in this movie because she had just got off of Everything Everywhere All at Once. So everyone was like, oh yeah, she's been in a bunch of stuff recently. But everybody else in this movie are like under the radar. I've never heard of, never seen for the most part. And then you look at the cast of the previous films, and it's a lot of like big names stars. People that are still, even today, you're like, oh yeah, that's a big name. Or like, you know, like even having I think in the first one you had Daisy Ridley was in that one. There's like a ton of cast in the first movie.
Johnny Depp is in that.
Johnny Depp's in the first one.
Judi Dench.
And then this movie is just like, it's a much smaller film. So I do wonder if they were like, let's just make it a shorter picture. And
again, is it simply and classically told, or is it tired and lazy? And that's where I
think it's tired and lazy. I think they do some really interesting stuff with the haunted house element to it, and I think they did a little bit more through. I think the haunted house stuff.
Hook.
The haunted house stuff is the hook of this movie, and I also like that they give the house a little more of a backstory. So, like, early on, I was saying, like, it's not a horror movie. It's not. It just has a lot of the same setups of a horror film where it's like this house, like, and they do it in a fun way where, like, the first thing that happens is there's
keep going. Keep going.
There's this Halloween party, much like the book, and all these orphans have been invited to this party because they're bringing the American tradition of Halloween to Venice, because this is post World War II, and all of the kids go to the Halloween party, and then the kind of a fun way of exploring exposition, they have this whole scene where this guy narrates the tale of the house to the kids, but it's also narrating to us as the audience as we're watching, like, this kind of traumatic story of like how there was all these kids who were in this house, and it was like a sanitarium back for like tuberculosis or the Black Plague or something, and they were all locked in there and they all died. And you're like, oh my gosh. So now you're already like raised, your suspicions already raised, and you're like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen next? And of course they have the seance, and I liked all that stuff. So I think that at least the end of the day, it leaves you with something that's a little bit different from a lot of other of these murder mystery films. And I don't think it's like these big murder mystery type movies. So it does bring something unique and different to the table that I thought I appreciated. But I do agree with you when it comes to the final product. You kind of leave the theater just like, okay, I saw that, but it's not like the worst movie going experience. There's nothing that like sticks out at you that you're like, oh, this is the worst movie ever. And now I'm just left here all by my lonesome as Charlie has to go to the bathroom.
No, I'm here. There was, and everything you just said is true. Like that is the hook of this. The unique part of this movie is what you just laid out. The whole but it's like, would it have been more interesting if the kids had stuck around? Because one random question: who was the guy in the mask who was telling the story about the?
Don't know. I want to know if that is somebody, if that was actually like some big name and they just snuck him into the movie and you never knew who he was. Like, could have been Ridley Scott or something.
Yeah.
He's just like hiding, and like you would never know that was him. But like, you never know. There's a guy. Yeah. So what we're saying is there's a guy in a mask who's telling the story to the kids at the orphanage, and they have this big screen and they have these shadow puppets, and they're showing it in shadow puppets. Which is cool. I liked that because because
it's 1947, and so they don't have a DVD player.
I think that's the other thing I like is just like when we think of holidays, there is like certain holidays have a certain nostalgia to them, and like when we think of Christmas, there's this nostalgia of like the Rankin Bass holiday specials with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and that's kind of in our vernacular of like what we think of Christmas. And I think with Halloween, it's gone from like just the holiday, not outside of horror films. It's like we have kids in costumes, and those costumes over the years have become less and less. It's almost like movies. It's like they've been less and less about just generic things. Like, I want to be a pirate. I want to be a ghost. Every year now, it's like, I want to be Paw Patrol. I want to be Spider-Man. I want to be
it's a little more commercial
Frozen,
these days.
It's like it's all about being a character from your favorite TV show or movie, and it's like that's kind of slowly crept into Halloween. But I thought it was kind of cool and a little creepy, where you're at this version of Halloween, or the it's still the same holiday essentially, but it's like this is the 40s Halloween in Italy. So it's people in mask and it's kids in mask, and it's more about like apple bobbing, which you never see anymore because I think of germs and people don't want to put their mouths in water that other people put their mouths in and everything else. So it's just kind of a neat little like, oh, this is kind of a window into another, like just another time period of Halloween, which I thought that was pretty cool.
Something like that was interesting. There's a scene very early on. So they have the whole party, and then they have the seance, and the seance is like our first little dose of creepy stuff going on, and he's trying to figure out what's real and what's fake. And there's a moment where he reveals that Madame Michelle Yeoh has 2 assistants and not just one, and that other assistant was hiding, and he was controlling something. He was like activating a thing,
special remote that would.
Yeah. That was like a special effect that was supposed to add to like, this is a real thing. So he's exposing her as being a fraud, but then other things happen that are kind of hard to explain. I'm sure you caught how the parakeet that's just kind of like hanging out throughout the movie.
Oh yeah,
Michelle Yeoh was freaking out. She's like, "Ah!" She's like ripping her skin off like this, and the parakeet everything gets quiet, and the parakeet goes, "Holy shit!" Which is like,
that was good. The movie's that's the other thing. The movie is kind of funny. Like it's like
Kenneth Branagh has that sense of humor. Like he does even in Hamlet. He does weird things.
It's a Christopher Nolan sense of humor where it's like you can throw in little jokes that aren't that, like in a movie that's taken seriously, you throw in just a very tiny joke and it gets a big laugh because it's like you don't expect it.
Exactly. So but
anyway, back to your list.
What list?
Go ahead. Do you have something?
Well, no, there's I can't even remember what I was just talking about with the seance and all that, but it's there's like the way the movie opens is you just see shots of Venice and there's birds, right? There's a bunch of birds. Right. And then there's a whole bunch of crows. I think they're crows. And then a seagull, I believe it was a seagull, eats one of the crows. And that's one of those, and then it's the opener's like, and then he wakes up and it's meant to be all meaningful, and I'm like, what is it? What? Like, you had a white bird eating a blackbird who was in a bunch of blackbirds, and like, was that what? Do you remember this?
I do, but I think you're like, I always look at those types of moments where they're just trying to set the mood to the movie, because if you like that image, just like it sets the mood for the movie, because you don't know, like, okay, what kind of movie are you getting into? And then if you have an image that shows that, you're like, oh, okay, I see what this movie's going to be. I don't see it as like being like awfully, like, I guess you're saying like he woke up like it's a dream, type thing, and like that was supposed to have a lot of meaning.
It's a dream, and it's like and at the time I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, what does this mean? I want to know what this means, but like,
you're saying, like, we never see
I'm like, it
imagery, we never see that imagery take place later in the film, is what you're
if instead that opener was the actual death of the girl, that would have actually been more cohesive with this whole story versus just a random one bird eating another just so Hercule.
I don't think it's random. I think it's more, again, I think it's more symbolic, but I do think
but
if they go that route, if they went that route,
what?
Well, crows usually mean death.
Yeah. So you had a seagull,
and then you also have
a seagull eating a crow. So what the fuck does that mean?
What does it mean?
I don't. That's
seagulls
what I mean.
Are white,
like,
right?
Yeah,
hold on, but seagulls are white, right?
Mm-hmm.
So maybe let me hold on. Where's my pretentious glasses, real quick? Let me put my pretentious specs on for a second, right?
Let's analyze specs.
What are they called?
One bird was white. One
bird was white, and the other bird was black. And usually crows mean death, but the white bird ends up eating the crow. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
is he the seagull? Is he the seagull?
Maybe.
And he's eating,
or the people that we think are the nicest people that we generally like, the mother, which we look upon and as like these nice and holy people, or people that we look up to, and we think, oh, these are people that are these are good people. This is what
a mother would never kill her daughter.
Mothers. We never think of mothers as murderers. We never think. Why would we ever think that? And then, like, so that opening image, maybe that's displaying is like you never know. Basically, just saying, like, you never know who could be a murderer, who could be evil. We don't.
That makes sense.
Even if it's somebody in white. So that's where I was like, I don't
sense.
think it's a bad thing. I just think
it's
like
bad, but it's just
what I wish they
reads as random.
If there's anything that I wish they had done more with, is maybe I need to go back and rewatch it, is bring back that motif towards the end. Like, we talked about Sidney Lumet, and I've read his book and he's the one who directed the first Murder on the Orient Express. And he talks about that. He talks about like if you have symbolism in your movie, like try to find those bits of symbolism that you can use. Like I think the famous one people will probably point to is Schindler's List with like the girl in the red and everything else, where whole movie's black and white. But you can do things like that where it's like I just wish maybe he went farther with it, where it's like, okay, we have the seagull and it eats the crow, and then like is there something at the end of the movie that could symbolize what that meant, or just reminded us about the seagull and the crow?
Yeah.
Throughout
Had that motif shown itself
Right.
once or twice more versus just being something that happens in the beginning where you're like, what?
But I do think, again, I think at the end of the day, it's just an opening image to get you in the mindset that this is going to be a murder, darker film.
But
And it
you
is.
say
Like,
that, and then I respond with, well, if that's the case, then why not show the murder of the girl or show the death of the girl that sparks this whole thing?
I think they wanted to. I think the reasoning is because I think they want to get from his perspective versus going it from a different perspective. I think it's a.
So it was a dream. It was basically a dream he had where a seagull ate a crow, and not just a seagull eating a crow, but there's a whole murder of crows. And
yeah, but again, like I think it's more of like it's one of those questions of like when you have a story, it doesn't matter who the story is, but whose perspective do you start with, and is there a point to different perspectives? And sometimes I think there is, like where it's like, do you start from the perspective of the main character? Do you start from the perspective of the bad guy doing the crime? Do you start with the perspective of the girlfriend? Do you start from
okay, sure, but if you're going to start with
with
Hercule's perspective, and his whole thing is that
I think it's just so.
No, listen. Like if his whole his whole idea is that his faith is gone because of all the horrible things he's been through,
Right.
then maybe we should have seen his final. A flashback to his final murder mystery, where, like, I remember, I can't remember for the life of me. I can't remember the.
But doesn't this
what's
movie
the
end?
movie?
Like,
No, what's the movie or show where there's a character who is like, I gave up on humanity. He was a detective. He's like, I gave up on humanity when I showed up to a crack house, and they had put their baby in the microwave to dry the baby off.
Was it? It's either Training Day or it was a Breaking Bad moment.
Maybe it was that was Breaking Bad. You're right. That was Breaking Bad. But that's what I mean. Like something that shows us more Hercule's perspective of like, this is why the guy is without faith. Even though there's been 2 movies beforehand, seeing this as a singular movie really hit that theme of him having very little respect for humanity because of some awful things he's seen, other than a seagull eating a crow. And it's like, it's so symbolic. And I'm like, yeah, but we forgot about that immediately, and it never came back. And from there we had other symbols. We had like bees. We had these kids. Like we had better symbols rocking rather than a fucking seagull and a crow. That's where it's just like the movie doesn't hit particularly hard. It's enjoyable, but it doesn't hit all that hard.
You definitely don't leave with a sense of like, yeah, you don't. There's not a triumphant feeling at the end of this movie. You're just kind of like, okay, that was the end of that case. Next case.
And even down to
that's the evening of it.
Yeah, even down to one of them was that at the very end. So he confronts everybody, including the mom, who's the killer, and she runs up to the top floor. And what we witness is the Alicia, right? Alicia is the daughter who was dead. What this whole story is about, and we've seen her throughout the whole movie. She interacts with Hercule, and then right at the end, the mom is like, I'm not going to jail or whatever. And we watch as Poirot watches Alicia throw her mother, like ghost Alicia throws her mother off the building, let's say the roof. And lands in the water, and then we see her dragging her down, which for the record is haunting as hell. Like anything having
You know
to
what it
do with like a
reminds me of?
spirit pulling somebody down to the depths is fucking terrifying. That
You
is
know what it reminded me
if you
of?
want to strike the fear in the heart of me, that's what you do. What does it remind you of?
It reminded me of, did you ever see Night of the Hunter
No.
with Robert Mitchum? It's this movie. I can't remember the director's name, but he was an actor himself, much like this movie. But it's a movie about a preacher, but he's not a preacher. He's a con artist, and he cons this woman and like falls in love with her. But then you find out that he like basically takes all of her money and kills her. But the image that you see of the woman is she's underwater. And this movie's in black and white, and she's underwater, and her hair's like flowing, and she's dead because she was drowned underwater, basically tied down to her car and sunk into the bottom of a lake.
Yeah, I'm
And it's
looking
a
at it.
creepy image, but that's what it reminded me of. But you're right. Anytime you see water and ghost, it's creepy. So
And anything, yeah, like
love it.
pulling somebody
I love ghost
down
stuff.
into the depth, like that the ending was very effective for me, at least, because that's something that anybody who's ever been out, like, I don't know, boating and you're tubing or you're skiing and you're left behind, and you're by yourself in the middle of a lake. It is simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. So, but regardless, it's that was effective. And like, for me, I think you've said at this point, you're like, I think I would say for you, you don't interpret this as being a supernatural movie. You see it, you seem to err on the side of it was all in this guy's head. Whereas me, I'm like, nope, based on that final scene, the ghosts are real. Like, that was a ghost.
I think the one
ghost,
time I
killed her
think
mom.
there's a good chunk of the movie. There's like a good chunk of the film where it's very easily explained that it's the drugs. But then there are two instances, including the one you're talking about, where maybe the ghosts are real, and one of them being when he sees the little girl and he thinks that she was one of the girl. Like, you think, oh, this is the logical explanation. She was the girl. She was one of the orphans that was at the party, and she just got lost and stayed there, and she's been there the whole time.
Which would have been cool. I kind of wish that would have been the case. I kind of wish
Tina
that
Fey
she
comes
would have
in and
stuck
she's
with
like,
her.
"Who the hell are you talking to?" And he's like,
yeah.
"You don't see that one." And then she like, you turn back and obviously she's not there, and you're like,
Yeah.
"Oh!" And then you find out later that that's actually the young version of the daughter.
Which was
like, that's what she
confusing.
looked
Like, why would there be a young version versus just like the teenage
That's not
version who
confusing. I
died?
feel like
Well, it was
well,
it
that's
was it was odd. It was like,
it's odd. Well, it's odd, but I feel like, again, going into the pretentious mind, I think when you deal with characters of death, I think all bets are off as to what they appear as, whether they're going to appear
Sure.
in their younger age or if they're older age. And I that's where I'm like, no, I think it's perfectly fine for
why
the
didn't she
ghost
show
to
up
look
as a
that way.
tiny little infant?
But it also reminded me,
Hey,
it
do you
also
guys do
maybe
you
she
hear
wanted to
that
be a little
baby
baby.
crying? Do you hear that baby crying?
Yeah, maybe she was a little baby. But it also reminded me of again, there was a movie I just watched recently called The Innocents, and in that movie, there's a part of the story where there's like these ghosts, and the main character, she keeps thinking there's these two ghosts or these two other people in the house. She doesn't know who they are, and at one point in the story, she finds this picture in this attic, and she's like, looks at it, and she's like, she like looks at the picture, and you're led to believe that either A, she figures out, like, she says to the other maid, she's like, that's the ghost, that's the guy I saw, and she's like, that guy died years ago. And so it's like, ooh, it's spooky. Or you're led to believe that like that's in all in her head, and she saw that image after the fact, and then she like, her brain made that assumption that was what she saw. So
There was
yeah, that's where it's like that's what they kind of did in this movie with the spooky thing, where he finally sees a picture or something, and then when he looks at the picture, he realizes like, oh wait, that's the little girl I saw.
There was
So
a
it's
moment
spooky.
in the kitchen scene that had the whole honey moment, where again the fiance, the ex-fiance, he said something that he said a line that was on theme with Branagh, with Perot questioning religion and all that. That almost would have been better for him to say, but it's like it still worked, I guess. Was he was talking about? He's like, you have all these humans searching for meaning, and when they see, they're constantly trying to bring order to chaos. Like they see stars in the sky and they assign constellations. Like that's not just a vague collection of stars. That's Cassiopeia. Or look at this family photo and there's a weird vague blur or highlight, and that must be grandpa. Which I appreciated. That was on theme, right? Because that's kind of the theme of the movie is, and something that Perot lays out logically early on is that if ghosts exist, then that means something occurs. There is something after death, which means that there is a God, because God would then have created that soul that lives on after death. Very logical, right? And that's I love that theme. I like take something like True Detective. I love True Detective. The whole season 1 of True Detective is Rustin Cole talking about like all this mad atheism stuff. And then right at the end, he has something that occurs where he's like, but I'm not sure. And that's kind of the essence of the search for faith theme, is always that, people say they'll rationalize things, and they'll say like, it's just us searching for meaning when in a meaningless existence and blah, blah, blah. But when it comes down to it, if there was ever any definitive proof, like, people say like, oh, there's nobody's ever gotten a shot of a ghost. And it's like, yeah, but if it's almost as if you were designing this existence, and in order for us to actually have free will, faith does have to be a choice at the end of the day. And that's why a movie like this resonates very hard with me, because it does come down to personal interpretation as opposed to a definitive answer, because a definitive answer doesn't reflect reality, where in reality, we do have to choose faith, because faith, being something based on belief, isn't based on pure logic, as in you have evidence. Like hey, look, here it is. Like on CNN, boom. Here's a picture of a ghost. This is our first picture of a ghost ever. It's confirmed this is a ghost. Well, guess what would happen? Everybody would believe, because boom, there's the evidence. Everybody would believe. So it's almost as if even in the age of having cameras everywhere, we don't have that definitive proof, because if we had it, then people would believe by default versus believing out of faith, which implies we still have free will. It's as if our free will would be robbed from us if it was that easy to believe. And so that's why I resonate with movies like this, because you can argue it either way based on things that happen in the movie. It's like a 50-50 coin flip, like, are ghosts real or not by the end? Because his logic is sound, but in reality, there are millions of people with ghost stories, and none of them have any tangible proof that they can submit, which for me is on the cynical hand. It's like, well, that's because everything's bullshit, man. On the more like meaningful side is this idea that it's almost like it's designed that way. It's almost as if it'd be too easy if there was any definitive proof. And that's even something like X-Files. I'm almost done watching the whole way through
all
everything
X-Files.
That's X-Files. And that's something that happens regularly there, is that the audience sees all these crazy things happening, but there's never Agent Mulder never gets any tangible proof, that one photograph or that one thing that would confirm all of his beliefs, and it drives him mad. But it's almost like it's as if reality is designed that way, because it would just be too easy otherwise. And then if you take and I'm almost done. If you what was that other movie or the TV show on Netflix called Messiah? Where Messiah did the same thing, where the whole thing is like, is this actually the return of Jesus? Is this guy actually Jesus 2.0? And so the whole time they're kind of giving you a 50-50, like something happens and you're looking at it going, that could be real, and then they give you evidence that it was fake or whatever. But the whole point, at some point he's in that well, that man-made well by the Washington Monument, and he starts walking on water, and some people are looking at it going, well, this is a goddamn miracle. And other people are going, well, it could be a trick, blah, blah, blah. The point being that if we witnessed a miracle happen, if any of us if like a big group of people saw a ghost, a week later, nobody would care. Some people would say it's BS. Other people would say, some people would believe, some people wouldn't believe, but in the end,
well, they already. I mean, you're talking about stuff
care.
that's already going on currently now. Currently now with aliens, people are like, people are coming out and saying like, yeah, aliens exist. There's this real stuff, and they're like going on
nobody
like
cares.
actual going up to Congress and saying all this stuff, and like, there's a lot of people that are just like, okay, okay,
because we're also
I'm like in
to
that
it
camp of
now.
like, but I'm also in that camp of like, I'm like, I want to believe in that stuff. Like that sounds cool.
You just said it. You just said it. I want to believe. That's like
that's Mulder's whole thing.
That's
I want
Mulder
to believe.
I want to believe, but when I see the stuff where it's like people coming up and they're saying like, oh yeah, it's the real thing, and you're like, okay, well, like show me video footage that doesn't look like it could be doctored, not of like a plane from miles away. Like
even if it was,
literally,
even if you got what you
literally
wanted, you would still not
of
believe.
like, I still
You'd
saw
still
footage,
be
like,
skeptical.
I was watching a video about UAPs is what they're calling them now, and the guy was talking about how like some of the UAPs that the military has reported back is actually like faulty, like it's actually their scopes are having these issues and they're not actually there, so they think they're seeing it on their scopes when really it's like their scopes are malfunctioning, and that's like some of that stuff they can't explain because the scopes themselves are top secret, so they can't really like go into detail as like why is it doing this. They're saying like half of that is that, and then the other half of it is like they can't explain it, like we have no idea what this is. So
but
they're out there,
even if they came out with, look at this video and look at all this evidence and all people
everyone would be like, no one would
be skeptical.
Like everyone would be so skeptical. So anyway, back to the list.
Jesus Christ came back and he brought this person back from the dead, and there's all this proof, and then people would still be like, I don't know. And that's again, that's why a story like this is meaningful, because what he's saying is like, I need that logic. He's like, God, I need you to make it simple. I need you to send me a sign. And what he gets is something that is only personal to him. And so now it's just like he believes based off his personal experience, and he could never convince Tina Fey to believe based on his experience alone. And that's kind of why he keeps it to himself. But that is the essence of faith. That a movie like this is how you,
it's a classic movie.
Yeah, it's and that's where half of me is like, I love all that, and then the other half is like, but the overall story elements are lazy is a heavy word to use.
Out.
I'm not trying to insult the movie by saying there's some laziness to it, but it seems like it's just kind of like what'd you say, played out? It's just like,
I think it's played. I think it's more of we've seen this so many times. I think it's more of the case of like you and I have probably seen this movie as far as the way in which the story is told, not like
but murder mystery wise, this movie would be pretty low on a list of murder mysteries.
It's the same thing I've seen. I mean, even the movie that you haven't seen, Glass Onion, follows a lot of the same tropes. People go to an island. There are a bunch of different people. There are a bunch of different suspects. And he solves a mystery really quickly, and then there's twists and turns, and you're not sure what everyone's motives is. And then over time, by the end of the movie, you're like, oh, this is what actually had been going on this whole time. And like, you figure out who the actual murderer was. It's the same thing, but it's like whether it's Clue, whether it's this, whether it's Murder by Death, which is another great like classic whodunit story, but they're more riffing on literary detectives and of the time period when that movie came out. So it's like, it's nothing new in that regard, but I do think there's enough newness to this where there's a slight fresh take where it's like, oh, that's kind of a unique way of making the story. So I think our assessment is where I would put it. I still think I would put it right under Sound of Freedom, because it it doesn't have anything that's missing. Like, if anything, it's just okay. This has been done before, but like, it's still pretty solid. But it doesn't. When you leave the theater, you're not blown away because it doesn't get you, I think, emotionally like some of the other movies do. By the end of it, like even like Gran Turismo is like by the end of that movie, you're just like on the edge of your seats. You're just like, yeah, he did it. Where this movie, it's like he did it. It's just like, yeah, he did it.
Even though he came out of retirement to do it, it doesn't seem like it was that much of a challenge. Which I did love the line where at some point Tina Fey, because he early on he's like, Tina Fey, you're gonna be my second in command. You're gonna be my assistant, and so right away then you're also like, okay, I got to suspect her. But she says something to him, and what'd he say? He said, don't awaken the bear and then be upset when he tangos. And she was like, nobody has ever said that ever. It's like it was like an old man joke. It was like a dad joke.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny. But the fact that you and I came in, this is a rare occurrence that you and I come in with the exact same assessment. So I'm not even going to question it.
No. But I think a lot of it's just like Sound of Freedom definitely leaves you wanting to cry. Flash has a heartfelt moment, but is marred by the actor and probably all of the CGI that's in that movie. But at the end of the day, you're actually like, the story works really well.
The movie's kind of a mess. Yeah.
I didn't see.
But so is Fast X. Asteroid City is its own mess. Spider-Man's its own mess. Like everything below this, like A Haunting in Venice is adequate so far as like being put together. It's like well put together, but it's lackluster.
But like there's not much. And I keep going back. There's not much to complain about this movie, but there's some of the movies on the top, like the caveat, like not the caveat, but it's just Creed 3 is a really well acted movie, but it's because it's well acted and certain actors really shine that you're really like invested in that movie. Where there are huge flaws in that movie, particularly I think the third act could have been rewritten a little bit better. But this movie, it's like everything is good. It's like handing in like an A+ paper, but like if I were to take someone else's A+ paper and your A+ paper, and like we read both of them, you're like, yeah, they're both good, but I like this one more because there's like this just gave more oomph to it.
Yeah,
not that it was a B+.
Between an
it
A
wasn't
and
a
an
B+
A+.
effort. It wasn't a B+ effort. It was literally just like, this is an A and this is an A.
Whether it's an A or a B, it's not a plus. There's no like, as plus implies like it's even better than this letter.
I'm just saying for the sake of analogy.
But I'm extending your analogy by saying that if this movie's a B, it's not a B+. It's just a B. There's no plus to this. You don't walk out like, again, when I walk out of something like Infinity Pool or Beau Is Afraid and my brain hurts because I'm so excited about what's in my head now, that's an A+. Whereas with this, I'm like, it was adequate. And even down, okay, so like there are things at the end where there were just two other notes I had. One of them is that there was a moment where it was like, okay, we're going to go ahead and insert a mystery within a mystery, which is that how is it that the guy, they had a doctor character, they had him locked in a room by himself, and yet
how did he die?
Hear a noise and you run in and it's like, how is it that he has a knife in his back? And then later it's like, well, because Mom, you called him on the interior phone network. You called him and you said, hey, motherfucker, you better kill yourself or I'm going to kill your son. And then this guy who
you're like, well, why would he kill himself that way?
A scene before we had just seen him that I didn't even write down, but yes, why would he stab himself in the back?
Would you, if you're told like kill yourself, like
you would fall on a sword. You would fall on it, which would mean your chest. You wouldn't stab yourself in the back because what if you fucked it up? Then you just have a knife in your back and you're like, you would cut your fucking throat. You would
Or
stab
you would've-
yourself in the heart. It would happen in the front, not the back. But what he does is he puts a knife on a wall, and then he lays on it, right? As opposed to falling on it. Like, you would, if you needed to die via the only thing you had in the room, you would either cut your own throat or you would set the blade on your heart, and then you would fall on it like a Roman soldier.
He didn't go out.
He didn't
like,
do
he
that
didn't go out
because because Agatha Christie wanted the mystery of how did this guy get stabbed in the back, and it's so yes, unless
Michael
she
Green,
said she may have said
Michael Green wanted that, not
Yes.
Agatha Christie.
Sure.
Again, these things are very drastically different.
And you could say maybe it's because the killer person said, hey, you're going to do it this way, right? You have to do it this way. But I'm watching it going, we just watched this guy beat the life out of another character. Couldn't he just kick the door down and go and try to save the life of his son? I mean, you could argue that no. She was so convincing, and she was like, I have your son right here, and I'm going to kill him. Because that was the thing. She was like, I'm going to kill your son if you don't kill yourself. But it doesn't exactly add up in a way that you're like, oh, that makes sense, right? And it's sad because we only see it in a flashback, and it would have been stronger as an actual scene, but we couldn't see the scene because they needed the shock value of finding this guy with a knife in his back. But wouldn't it have been better if we'd have seen the guy get a phone call and we don't hear the other person on the line, but he gets the phone call and then we watch him kill himself, like that. Like,
and then it gets rid of the. I mean, there's more mystery, but it gets rid of the mystery for the characters. It's one of those things where you're asking the audience. You're like saying, "Hey, audience," you're changing the scene from mystery to suspense because now it's like, okay, but it's both because then there's no heroin. Hold on, no heroin. We're gonna bring that back now that we have that T-shirt. But no, you get that. You get like you're like, well, if you put that scene in the movie and it's as a scene and we see it instead of a flashback, it adds a sense of mystery because for the audience, we have no idea who was on the other end of the phone and why did he do that way. We don't know that. But now the audience, now the audience knows more than the blah 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 than the characters.
Yeah.
Now it's a scene of suspense, but it's also a scene of mystery for them. But now it's like it's a whole thing. It's like
so instead what we got was a catch up at the end where it's like you called him and you told him to kill him. Like suddenly Hercule got all this stuff correct. He got nothing wrong. Including the Hail Mary of how did the guy die? Well, he died because you called him and convinced him to kill himself. Like, it's just like I guess that's logical, but at the same time, he could have been so wrong about that. But okay. And then the next step of that was also that the next day, the caretaker chick, she ends up adopting the boy because the boy's dad had stabbed himself in the back. And then it turns out that all of this is because of the boy. All of it.
He's like,
remember that?
Guilty. Yeah, because he's like, but then he says something. Yeah, and then it's like it's tied up because it's like he's like, I know you're the one who blackmailed them. Because
you were the blackmailer.
When the initial thing comes out, it's like he says the doctor was the one who blackmailed her, and really it was the kid who was doing this.
It was the doctor's son.
And because he knew, because the doctor's son had seen all the evidence of the poisoning, and he was like, she wasn't murdered, or it wasn't suicide. She was murdered, or she was poisoned. And so the son kind of figured all this out because he also reads a lot of books. So he knew that the flowers and the honey, like he figured all this out much like Perot would. And then at the end, Perot's like, just to give us a little more hook, it's like, oh no, you were the one who did this. But then it's like, you didn't know what to do with all that money. So you were just like, yeah, I just paid the bills. I didn't know what to do with the rest of the money. So then they tie it back to the two assistants who had this whole story where they wanted to go to Missouri because they saw see you in St. Louis or meet you in St. Louis. So they just want to go to Missouri. So he's like, well, we can all tie all this stuff up. Yeah. And they can all go to Missouri, and he gets a mom and she gets a son, and it's all wrapped up nice.
And then based off of all of that, he's like, my faith is restored, and between that and seeing a ghost, and it's, I don't know. In the end, it just ends up being too easy, and
I do think
with
it's
a
the
lack of
runtime
adversity.
of it.
That's why you walk out of it being like, it's just kind of
Yeah,
underwhelming. It's not
I think
bad,
the
but it's
run
underwhelming.
I think it's the runtime too, because I like looking at the runtime. I'm like, oh, this wasn't even a 2-hour movie. This was an hour 40, which roughly is hour 43, which is 100 minutes, 103 minutes. So I'm like, okay, I think there may have been a cut, or there may have been like 20 minutes that they could have utilized, but maybe they didn't have a lot there and they wanted to shorten it because maybe they realized
They interviewed everybody
maybe they
one
realized that they
time.
didn't have.
They
Maybe they
interviewed
realized that
everybody one time to the point where it was like, okay, based off single interviews with everybody, he solved it with no problem. The only
Right.
problem was that he was high the whole time because of the honey, but like that didn't stop him.
I
That
just
didn't
love that
do
scene where
anything.
he's like, "You don't hear that?" And he's like running. He's just like, she's like, everybody else is like, "What is this dude doing?" He's just like running through the house, just trying to find where the noise is coming from.
Yeah. But from a production standpoint, though, the final shot of the movie was pretty dope. Where
Which one was that?
So remember in the beginning, he turned down that guy who was like, everybody in my family is dying. I don't get it.
Oh,
And he's like, screw off, buddy. And then at the end,
then
that
he's
guy
on the
comes
top
into
of the
his
roof and
house. He comes out to the top of the roof and he's like, and he's already solved the mystery of this stranger and he's telling him what to do. And then it's this whole aerial shot and it's just like flying around Venice. And I was like, that was cool. That's just, like a,
Right.
just an appropriate ending. But
The
that's
other
just a
thing,
production thing.
I should have done this for our slides just because we covered Bond. I should have just been like, these were the scenes that this is the exact same place from Bond, because like there's specifically a bridge, and I think they use it in almost every Hollywood movie that goes to Venice. There's a bridge that they walk across, and I'm like, that's the same bridge from Moonraker. That's the same bridge from all these other Bond films. Spider-Man, like there's a bunch of them where they go to Venice and they go to a lot of the same locations in that area. And I'm like, after watching this, I'm like, God, I want to go to Venice. Like that's out of all the cities, I want to go to Venice. Like,
I never care about
I
any
see
city,
it.
but Venice is one of those where, and they even
You
say
always-
at some point,
it's
they're
so
like,
interesting.
Tina Fey says it's a jewel ready to fall into the sea. And I'm just like, yeah, because it represents such a different way of life. That the water is such a, I mean, I had a hard time finding a home in Indiana because I kept telling my realtor, put me on water. I have a hard time not being on water. And she's like, it's Indiana, you idiot. Like there's not that much water. And I was like,
they did that with the casinos. They did that with the casinos in Indiana at one point. So no, but yeah, watch that. But what was it? Like multiple Bond films, they go to Venice.
Yeah.
Casino, they go to Venice. Moonraker, they go to Venice. From Russia with Love, they go to Venice. It's like you see it in so many movies, especially the Bond films, where I'm like, damn, like I kind of want to go to Venice, even after watching this one. And I think they shoot the city so beautifully. You're just like, man, this is so cool. And it's like a different take on it too, because you usually they go to Venice and it's like just Venice. Like there's nothing else. It's not Christmas, it's not Halloween. This was Halloween in Venice, and you got the spooky almost I mean, it definitely reminded me of Eyes Wide Shut with the mask, but I think that's like an Italian mask type thing. But like,
I went straight to crap. I went straight to
Phantom of the Opera?
Wicker Man.
Okay.
Wicker Man, they have like the pagan masks, and they're like paper mache and that much more creepy.
Nick Cage one or the good one?
Which do you think? Both.
Both. Okay. Okay.
You got to watch both because it's Nick Cage, dude. which by the way, I watched it recently and I was shocked that there was no Not the Bees. And it was like a Mandela effect moment where I was like, wait a second, what happened to the Not the Bees? I remember seeing Not the Bees when I saw this when I was I was a high schooler.
Behind that?
You watch it, that was a deleted scene.
Okay.
And I think I researched it afterwards because I was like, wait a second, is it the case that the filmmakers were so embarrassed that they clipped it out? I don't think so. I think the theatrical release didn't have Not the Bees, and Not the Bees is actually a deleted scene. But we all treat it like the movie actually had that in it. And I'm willing to be totally wrong because I remember seeing the movie as a teen. well before I saw the original, which, by the way, has Christopher Lee in it, and Christopher Lee is just the best. But the whole Not the Beast thing, like I watched it because you watch the original and you're like, damn, what a good movie. And then you watch the remake and you're ready to watch Not the Bees and laugh your ass off. And then when it doesn't show up, you're like, whoa, some Mandela effect stuff is happening.
It reminded me of I saw Spider-Man 3 not that long ago. With Tobey Maguire. I watched Spider-Man 3. I had the same thing that happened to me. And I was like, wait, this is not how the movie ends. And I was so confused. And I was like, what? This is not like, there was this scene with the butler and he explains, like, he goes to Harry and he's like, yeah, that night your father died. I examined the wounds. And I was
that
like,
happened.
It wasn't in. Okay, there's an explanation though. So I'm like, wait, what? There was that scene and they took it out and the scene's not in there. And then like the way that everything happens at the end of the movie is different. I was like, this is a little different. Like, it's the same,
are you watching
but
the editor's cut or something?
And it was the editor's cut, and I didn't realize it was the editor's cut. And I was like, oh, it threw me for a loop there. So that was kind of fun, where it's like it's a different cut of the movie altogether, and you're like, oh, this was not the same movie. But
well, again, you could be watching Film Hacker. And Film Hacker only makes good movies.
I don't know.
Anyway, that's everything I got. So we got Kenneth. We got what is that from?
I don't know. I just look up. I'm now like, I have no idea what
Much
that's
Ado
from.
About Nothing, or didn't he make that one?
I think he did. I just was like, you know what? Let's just have fun with the toast. And I'm like, we got to find some silly photo of Kenneth Branagh, and he did not disappoint. So
yeah. Well, I mean, we already talked about everything he's made.
He's the GOAT when it comes to all of that. Like, there's not a single movie that he's like, there's a reason why he's directed and he's all these big movies, and he's like in every, he's attached to all these major franchises in some weird way. So
yeah.
Good on him, man. Like, he might, I don't know. I've heard he's a big a-hole pretentious dude, but I mean,
but he deserves
doing
it.
Something right.
Like, he deserves it. It's like anytime you hear anything about like most recently, it's like, it turns out Jimmy Fallon is mean to people, and it's like, yeah, because he's Jimmy Fallon, you fucking idiot. Like, you abide by some idealistic bullshit that people who are big time don't have standards. Fuck you, you fucking weakling. You know, it's like, oh, things are so bad under Jimmy Fallon, we needed cry rooms. Things are so bad under Kenneth Branagh, we need cry rooms. Yeah, go cry, asshole. Go get your fucking feelies out and then come back and hang out with the big boys. Like, if you expect any different, you don't understand how anything is made, because to actually achieve something, you really do. Unfortunately, it's just the fact of life. If you're nice to people, they get lazy on you. They get lax. So if anybody's actually made anything of quality, it's because they have fucking standards and they stick to it, and they make people. You've heard me go on about this endlessly about Martin Campbell. Like, the reason why his Bond movies are the top of our list and will always be there is because the guy, well, you know, like on vacation, he's a really pleasant fella. But when he's making a movie, he's a fucking asshole. And there's utility to that. There's a reason for that. Right. And that's because you get shit done. And so what I worry about with a movie like this is that maybe, and it's not the worst thing, that maybe Kenneth Branagh is getting, maybe Kenneth is getting old. But that's only natural. And I'm not going to give him that much shit. We put this movie at number 13 out of 42 so far.
Which is fitting. You're like, number 13. It's such a fitting thing for a spooky movie.
Yeah.
Spooky. I'm going to say spooky. It's not that spooky.
So Mr. Branagh has made a lot of good movies. He's a very talented dude. And if this is like, you know, this won't be the last that he makes, but if he's getting a little older, it's and he's still pumping out stuff like this. We're about to see some Scorsese movies, and we'll see how he does. And Clint Eastwood's on his way out. A lot of classic directors are on their way out, but could be a lot worse. But this is still a solid effort from an incredibly talented individual who, if he's an asshole, he deserves it. For Kenneth.
For Kenneth.
Cheers. Good night, y'all.